Remember this moment, the elder said, because everything after it will pretend it was inevitable. The crystal auditorium of Nexus Prime glowed like frozen dawn over an ocean. Flags, fronds, membranes, and metal crests of 800 worlds rippled in a climate field that smelled faintly of copper and rain. For 10,000 years, the Confederation had gathered here to renew the story it loved about itself. Rational, peaceful, enlightened, forever self-correcting. On this day the story met someone older than the story. Elder Arakai, last of the progenitors, rose from a chair carved before most stars in the ceiling were born. She was not imposing, thin as a quill, hair like comet threads, but silence moved ahead of her like a tide. The 12 sat behind, polished and patient. Admirals in stern gold, champions in engraved armor, mind speakers with closed eyes, technocrats draped in cooling wires. They were the vocabulary of power. Empires often confuse longevity with legitimacy. 1,000 tidy centuries can feel like proof that the rules are moral because the rules have lasted. But constitutions are not the same as habits. They are promises you must keep even when no one is watching. Somewhere, in a future classroom that did not yet exist, a civics teacher would ask first-year students a very old question. Does order create justice, or does justice authorize order? The hall on Nexus Prime would have answered wrongly, cheerfully. My children, Arakai began, voice no louder than a library whisper and twice as binding. We left you a warning in the deep places where metal cannot corrode it and time cannot explain it away. When the two-legged ones of the third world claim the void, do not stand in their way. They are the kind of storm that decides what a coast is. The sentence flowed through translation matrices and came out in every tongue, still a warning and also a promise. Laughter answered first, the polite kind used on art critics and prophets. The Altarian admiral, bright as minted sunlight, folded his hands. Elder, we appreciate tradition, but our peace is a system, not a superstition. We have solved war. We have weapons that pinch space and shields that drink stars. What could undo an equation this mature? Arakai did not blink. Not power, a premise. You measure strength by what it resists. They measure strength by what it becomes. Show them a wall and they will not break themselves upon it. They will borrow its bricks. Mind speaker Thelian risked the kind of question his order usually asks without moving lips. Elder, is this memory or metaphor? Both, she said, and Thelian opened all three eyes. The hall wanted to move on, committees waiting, tariffs to revise, expansion charts to color, but the admiral offered courtesy. Let the elder finish. Arakai did not finish. She planted a seed. If you must meet them, treat them as equals at once. Do not file them under junior. Do not put leashes on the future and then complain when your wrist is bitten. Do not build a story in which you are the teacher and they are the test. You will fail it. She stepped back. The silence did not. Protocol resumed, a clean machine swallowing grit. Machines do that. The agenda rolled. Credits were allocated to Ring Road trade. A subcommittee on piracy congratulated itself on a report that defined pirates as people without stationery. Somewhere a choir sang the anthem about reason being enough. On cue, a runner with breathless eyes hurried in. Outer Rim listening posts report structured radio originating from an uncharted yellow star, he said, words tripping over urgency. Multi-site, planetary in scale. Automated analysis names the system Sol. The source is the third planet. There is a sound political bodies make when prophecy elbows them in the ribs. It is identical to the sound of data. The 12 exchanged looks that said, "See." New friends, new markets, new pupils. Arakai closed her eyes, which made her the only one in the room who saw farther. "Prepare first contact mission," the Admiral ordered. "Peaceful approach, standard algorithm, provisional invitation to junior membership." The minutes will later be archived as proof that due process occurred. The chorus will sing again. The warning will sit where old warnings sit, adjacent to the minutes, politely unread. "Remember this moment," she had said, "not because it was avoidable, because everyone will swear it was unavoidable." The carrier Concorde's promise slid out of folded space 6 hours from Earth and announced itself with lights and music instead of teeth. Its hull was gold so no one would miss it. Its velocity was slow so no one would fear it. That was the algorithm. Be obvious, be gentle, be in charge. Ambassador Vel Theron rehearsed the script his academy had baked into him. Begin with the universal math. Offer friendship glyphs. Request a meeting under Confederation law. Extend junior membership with guided transfers. Clean energy, safe medicine, limited drives, licensed culture. It had worked on sulfur breathers, sun sippers, and the folks who argued with rain. Peace as product, onboarding as process. "Passive scan," said Science Officer Kethin, her forearms flicking over airy keys. "Third planet shows radio networks, orbital platforms, fragmented polities. Energy output high, signatures of fission and something edging fusion. Industrial density beyond expectation." Beyond expectation. Vel Theron kept his voice mild. Or beyond permission. Both, Kethin said. The first exchange went by numbers, a prime sequence, then another, then an elegant joke in geometry that drew a laugh on the bridge and made the comms officer, Xanth, lean forward. "They've sent back a proof," Xanth whispered. "Relativity derivation with corrections for a metric we don't publish. The handwriting, if math can have handwriting, feels playful." Vel Theron swallowed the taste of surprise. "Acknowledge, stay in the script." They tried the history glyphs the Confederation uses as a calling card, a mural of uplifted worlds, a parade of elders instructing juveniles. The reply from Earth was a request for citations. "Specifics," Xanth said, scanning a rainstorm of packets. "They want documentation of our charter, dates of accession, minutes of a proceeding 2 centuries ago where we sanctioned an expansion war, and this is odd, a copy of our code of ethics for scientific trials." The ambassador smiled despite himself. "They ask like lawyers." "Like citizens," Kethin murmured. Earth lit as they approached, coastlines like necklaces, cities like sequins. Satellites formed a belt of eyes that had learned to share notes. Comms windows filled with politeness dressed as warning. Identify, state intentions, maintain distance, meet in neutral space. Neutral space. Vel Theron raised a brow ridge. "To them we are wonder, why not meet under our skylights?" "Because," Kethin said, "wonder is leverage you shouldn't give away." They offered to receive a delegation aboard the Concorde's promise. Earth agreed on conditions. Manifest the meeting room in view of all cameras. Share partial schematics for life support. Permit broad-spectrum scans for hidden weapons. Provide, ahead of time, the questions they refuse to answer. Vel Theron approved more than he admitted. On Earth, fear wore homework. Education appeared not as a sermon but as behavior. The delegation arrived in smart fabrics and bad sleep, wrists bright with processors. Their lead introduced himself as Dr. Isaiah Monroe, chief science advisor to a coalition that will argue with itself later. His accent placed him. His courtesy placed him better. "Ambassador," Monroe said, shaking hands with a confidence that registers on sensors, "we appreciate the invitation. We also appreciate that invitations imply power. Before we respond to anything, we'd like to ask what you consider non-negotiable." Veltharin considered his answer and found it full of assumptions aged so long they looked like truth. "Peace," he said first, because one must. "Coordinated access to technology under guidance, because control." Monroe smiled without heat. "Peace is a framework, prosperity is a metric, guidance is a euphemism. We're happy to cooperate, we won't be managed." They walked through a gallery of star maps that flattered Confederation patience. Monroe paused at a plaque, 10 millennia without a civil war. "Congratulations," he said, "and condolences. Societies that avoid argument too long usually export it or they freeze." Veltharin had been trained for defiance, hysteria, worship, not criticism that cared. He tried a different angle. "You developed fission under rival flags and still woke up the next day. Your satellites listen too well. You ask for proofs like judges. You're not awestruck, Dr. Monroe." "We are," Monroe said, "just not at the discount you expected." He asked about FTL metrics like a man asking about roads he intends to pave. He showed artificial gravity models so close to useful that Kethin forgot to blink. He raised concerns about junior membership that sounded like the muscle memory of a republic. Who votes, who vetoes, who can leave when staying is unjust. By the end, neither side had won anything and both had learned too much. The Confederation sent up its offer, clean and polished and inevitable. Junior status, guided access, supervision. Earth replied with a location. A place between orbits, nobody's home, cameras permitted, lawyers welcome. That night, Veltharin dreamed of a wall that kept moving because the house behind it kept changing. He woke to a message that felt like a handshake and a dare. "We will meet you where neither of us can pretend to be taller." In the morning, the elder's sentence arrived in his memory, late and perfect. "Do not build a story in which you are the teacher and they are the test. You will fail it." 30 years passed the way revolutions always pass in history books, 3 lines and a sigh. On maps, however, they burned. Authorized human footholds in 3 safe systems multiplied like ideas. A ledger in Nexus Prime insisted there were 12 colonies. A logistics model in human space counted dozens. A rumor said more. The rumor was right. Admiral Core of the Corvin hegemony arrived above Iron Beta expecting paperwork and found a city. Oceans ringed green continents, orbital frames stitched light into geometry, and on the night side a lattice of industry pulsed like a quiet heart. The registry called the system unassigned. The ground disagreed and had receipts. "Scan," Core said. "Population near 2 million, replied his captain. "Manufactories, schools, hospitals, defensive arrays of unknown design. Construction timelines do not fit physics as we know it. Prefab assembly. Yes, but there's more." "Open channel," Core said, trusting mass and precedent. The face that answered belonged to Governor Mara Steele, which was also a sentence. Her expression suggested she had the minutes from every meeting where someone like Core had promised something like patience. "Admiral," she said, "welcome to New Iron. You're in violation of our airspace." "Our." Core summoned the tone instructors teach when diplomacy needs spine. "This system is not on your list. Confederation settlement law. Applies to members in good standing," Steele finished, "and to those who agreed to slower chains so older species could keep feeling tall. We asked for review. We were told to be grateful. We built anyway. Core named the ships behind him, 12 battle cruisers, an argument with engines. You will evacuate in 30 standard days. All unauthorized technology will be surrendered for inspection. Compliance will be commended. Steele's smile did not reach inventory. No. The bridge of the flagship Iron Resolve handled silence like a professional. Then sensors sang. New contacts, dozens, no, scores, appearing where nothing had been. Sleek hulls too clean for a first draft, weapons arrays that refused to resolve into familiar families. The human grid unfolded like a hand revealing cards you thought were bought yesterday and find stamped last chance. Decloaking. The tactical officer breathed. Positions routine for an ambush, unusual for a public service announcement. Those are defense platforms, Steele said on the open channel, almost companionably. Automated, fast, and equipped with things your libraries don't have drawers for. We're not threatening you. We're explaining the boundaries of our home. Humans do not possess stealth technology, Core said, half to her and half to the universe where his training lived. We don't possess yours, Steele answered. We built ours. A lesser officer would have postured. Core ran numbers. The ratios did not comfort. He asked privately for Confederate command. The reply arrived wrapped in noise and gravity. 3 days ago, humans appeared in 7 core systems, delivered notes, and left before our sensors caught their shadows. Proceed without engagement. Core looked again at New Iron and saw not defiance but policy. He made one more try out of duty and because duty likes a record. Governor, you have violated settlement law, technology law, and the unwritten law that says junior species do not surprise senior species. You're asking us to rewrite 10,000 years of governance to accommodate your pace. Steele's voice softened in a way that made it sharper. You confuse age with authority. We're Americans and Ethiopians and Polynesians and Han and Yoruba and Lakota and 1,000 more. A coalition that learned painfully that legitimacy is not a birthday but a consent. Your laws assumed our consent forever. Our consent expired. Defensive positions, Core ordered quietly on a private channel. The human ships did not move. They did not need to. The move had happened in the industrial decade everyone else had used for speeches. Withdraw, command repeated. Core tasted metal, the taste of surprise, the taste of losing a story. He looked at the screen where a governor guarded 2 million citizens with the ease of someone who had memorized what surrender costs, and he said the words his ancestors had not said in 1,000 years. Understood. The Corvin fleet left without firing. The platforms did not pursue. The governor did not gloat. It was worse than defeat. It was instruction. News travels in civilization the way electricity travels in old wires, everywhere at once and then the fire. Member worlds began asking questions they had retired. Why junior status at all? Who profits from slow ladders? If the best argument for our system is that it is old, should we be trusting it or checking it? The Confederation convened 6 committees and a civic hymn. Committees are good at describing storms, not at building roofs. On a morning that arrived like a verdict, the human leader most feared by old briefings spoke to the galaxy on every channel at once. Her name was Admiral Sarah Chen, and she began like a civics teacher and finished like history. The message began like a pledge, not a threat. For 35 years, Admiral Sarah Chen said, we tried to work inside your story. We followed your forms, signed your forms, waited on your forms. We were told to accept ceilings because they were old. We do not confuse age with wisdom. We do not confuse process with justice. In command rooms that had never known helplessness, officers reached for mute that did not exist. The broadcast had hijacked relays by talking politely to their security models and then teaching them a better way to be secure. Somewhere, a programmer on a small moon took notes and smiled like a person seeing a proof completed. "We are withdrawing from junior membership," Chen continued. "Our colonies are independent. Confederation personnel have 48 hours to leave human space. If you come with weapons after that, you are not diplomats. You are targets." Admiral Core, now back in the line, now older by a week that had centuries inside it, watched her tactical displays carve the Sol system into a warning. Defensive platforms lit like constellations someone had decided to annotate. Asteroid rigs wore new skin and new purpose. Patrol craft marked nothing and everything. Core felt respect and dread, which are siblings. The Confederation gathered itself into the old answer: mass. 200 warships of the hegemony burned toward Sol behind a hymn about restoring order. Nobody asked what kind. On the iron resolve, the tactical officer's voice held the pitch reserved for fire alarms. Energy spikes across the system. Unknown signatures, sir. Something's missing. Missing. Our exit, the officer said. Hyperspace metrics are held. Held, a verb like a hand on your throat. Across the net, ships whispered about inhibitor fields no one had seen outside nightmares. Chen did not boast, she taught. "We built what we were denied," she said, "on open space. Not to be superior, but to be equal. Equality requires tools." Core remembered the elders' grammar: not power, a premise. Show them a wall and they will borrow its bricks. He watched human strike craft appear as if stepping between frames of film. They fired with a discipline that felt like mercy until it wasn't. Corvin shields faltered not because they were weak, but because the attack pattern refused to be the kind those shields had been invented to solve. The first ships to die were escorts, the second were assumptions. "Center on the heavies," Core ordered. "Protect the spine. Make the enemy take time. Time is what innovators steal." Human volleys came in sequences tuned to the lazy harmonics of Corvin capacitors. You could almost hear an engineer laugh. "Thank you for publishing your patents for 1,000 years. A channel opened. On it stood a woman in a uniform that didn't shout. Authority is often quiet. "I am Captain Elena Vasquez of the human defense ship Retribution. Admiral, your fleet is outnumbered in ways that do not fit your math. Withdraw, and we will not press our advantage." Core surprised himself by asking a question instead of answering with doctrine. "How did you do it in 3 decades? We gave you guardrails for your own good." "Guardrails are for children and highways," Vasquez said. "We are neither. You taught the galaxy to accept ceilings. We learned to ask who benefits." Behind her the pattern changed. Massive silhouettes woke, larger than Corvin battle cruisers, geometry solving for purpose. Somewhere a designer would call it a new language. Nothing wasted, everything argued for. "Admiral," Vasquez added, "there will be a future for you in the future we are making, but not if you insist on arriving as owners." Ethics inside tactics. Core had not expected that. He thought of the Academy's lectures on deterrence, on escalation control, on the nobility of restraint performed like opera. He thought of civics in old Terran republics, imperfect, loud, stubbornly revised, and felt against habit envy. "All ships," he said, "prepare to withdraw when you can." He did not add if. He did not need to. Drives are still held, the tactical officer said. The inhibitors will let us go when the lesson lands, Core said. Chen came back on the net, not to humiliate but to declare terms that sounded like a course syllabus. Open technology standards, representation by contribution, expansion by consent. She spoke as if the galaxy were a classroom too large for one teacher and too important to fake. Admiral Core, she said, and the use of his name felt like a hand outstretched. There is one more demonstration we must run before we can talk about peace. You will not enjoy it. That is the point. But you will survive it. That also is the point. On Core's screens, the human fleet rearranged itself into an argument that could draw on a whiteboard, axes and vectors, timing and grace. Somewhere the elder's warning shone in quantum crystal, and somewhere a student copied it into a notebook with a margin note. Consent authorizes order. The iron resolve trembled as the first wave arrived. Lights dimmed. The ship sang its stress song. Core gripped the rail and felt, to his surprise, not humiliation but relief. A story was ending that had lasted too long. Begin, he said, because the only way out of a wrong lesson is through the right one, and the sky obeyed. The inhibitor fields fell like a curtain rising, and the Corvin survivors jumped as if the act of leaving could erase the lesson. It could not. In the war rooms of Nexus Prime, models that had always told good stories about tomorrow began to produce silence. Silence is what honest math makes when a premise is wrong. Admiral Corvash convened an emergency session that felt like a confessional without priests. The 12 assembled with the weight of 10,000 easy years on their shoulders. On the lower tiers, delegates from old species who remembered hunger traded looks with young ones who remembered ambition. The mind speakers did not bother with mind. Grief reads loud. "We have lost," said the Altarian admiral who had never practiced the sentence. It came out gentle, which is how reality speaks when you finally let it. "We have not merely lost ships. We have lost the story in which our ships were enough." A chancellor in plated pride slammed a gauntlet on the rail. "Then we rebuild the story bigger." Old answers are faithful that way. Archivist M. Hai, scaled, silver, and slow, rose from the scholar's bench like a page standing up to be read. "No, we revised the premise. For millennia, we equated seniority with stewardship. We enforced ceilings on junior species to prevent chaos, and then we congratulated ourselves for the calm we caused. We called it peace. It was domestication." "Enough rhetoric," snapped the chancellor. "They cheated, they stole, they published," M. Hai corrected, eyes bright. "Open standards in all the wrong places. They understood something we forgot. Power is not a river you dam, it's a network you join." Screens chimed. Human reconnaissance flickered through mainstream feeds. Drive-by spectral scans of shipyards, supply depots, carrier spines. No shots, only knowledge. The effect was worse than a raid. The Confederation had built legitimacy on the belief that it could not be surprised. Being mapped felt like being undressed in public. Then a new file landed, not a manifesto, a draft. The Merit and Consent Framework. 1. Representation by measurable contribution to common goods, disaster relief, research, exploration, mutual defense. 2. Technology sharing as a default. Withholding requires supermajority and sunset. 3. Any member may exit with assets intact, no punitive embargoes. 4. Expansion requires consent of inhabitants and neighbors, autonomous zones protected. 5. Junior status abolished. Training replaces tutelage. 6. Civic audit, every 5 years, independent review of decision procedures. The draft was signed not by a state but by a coalition of human institutions, universities, unions, councils, the sort of bureaucracy that grows in places where citizens fight over budgets instead of borders. Attached was an invitation. Parley at Axial Ring, a decommissioned research wheel parked between claims, cameras allowed, mind speakers permitted, weapons automated out of existence by joint oversight. Elder Arakai was specifically named as witness. The floor erupted, as floors do when the ceiling moves. Hardliners barked about sovereignty, moderates spoke of prudence, merchants counted profits and called it peace. The argument was not about facts anymore. It was about identity. Were they the teachers in a galaxy classroom, or alumni who needed remedial civics? Corvash held the chamber with the single most difficult act a leader can perform, admitting the old way was not evil and still must end. We protected order for ages, he said. We also protected ourselves. We have learned our limits. Let us go and ask to learn more. We, hissed the Chancellor. Yes, Corvash replied, because legitimacy is what you get when those you govern can leave and choose not to. He looked to the elder, who looked as if time were a language she had been patient enough to speak. Will you attend? He asked. I will witness, she said, and I will grade. Outside, in the refugee bays of returning ships, Corvan medics recorded names and made lists that would later become memorials and later still become lessons. On New Iran, Governor Steele read the invitation again, then closed her eyes and whispered a prayer that sounded like homework. On Earth, high school civics classes watched Admiral Chen answer questions from angry hosts with the calm of someone who had studied both Aristotle and assembly code. Axial Ring rotated in the dark like a wedding band waiting for hands. The parley would begin when the old empire learned where a table goes and how many chairs it needs. Axial Ring's corridors smelled like old ozone and new paint. Engineers from 5 species had resurrected the wheel in a month of cheerful argument. The best friendships begin with disagreements that survive deadlines. Cameras watched the way citizens watch. They were not guard dogs. They were mirrors. The Confederation delegation arrived in sober colors, flanked by mind speakers who preferred not to eavesdrop, but would if the future required it. The human delegation entered with the practiced humility of people who had learned the hard way that triumph is a poor teacher. Admiral Chen walked beside Dr. Isaiah Monroe, Governor Steele, and a dozen others whose titles sounded civilian and were. Behind them came an empty seat labeled Elder Arakai. Thank you for meeting, Chen said. Thank you for meeting here. Neutral ground, Corvash replied. A useful fiction. Useful truths are better, Chen said and gestured to the transparent wall. Let's make some. The opening session was not a duel but an audit. Human engineers presented failures alongside inventions, disasters that taught redundancy, pandemics that taught public health, bridges that fell and were rebuilt with better codes. Confederation technologists responded with graceful old solutions. Metastable shields, long-cycle crop networks, conduct codes for first contact that, at their best, had spared worlds from panic. The surprising tone was gratitude. Expertise crossed aisles. Menace turned into mentorship. Then the saboteurs tried to write a different scene. A Corvette with Confederation codes flared hard toward the ring, trailing distress like a fire. Automatic defense at the station did what automatic defense does. nothing without consent. Hardliners on the Confederation bench exchanged whispers whose urgency smelled like guilt. On the human side, 3 officers looked at one another and did not move. A fourth, Vasquez, promoted and unpromoted, differently lifted a mic. To the incoming corvette, she said, voice even, "Your transponder is copied from a retired hull, and your heat signature is wrong for your mass. You are carrying shaped charges in a gift you plan to present as evidence. Stand down. This forum will not be murdered for your narrative." On a side screen, code bloomed, clean and annotated. Monroe spoke without triumph. "Your timer was clever. So are the children in our third-year security labs." The corvette's engines died as a tug inched it toward a capture bay that had been designed for just this sort of human moment. The kind when someone mistakes attention for legitimacy and finds neither. Corvash did not look at the hardliners. He looked at the cameras. "This is our failure," he said. "Old power resists new accountability. Let it be written, we will not let cowards define the terms of our courage." Elder Arakai entered then, not as a judge but as a witness whose presence changes the math. She took her labeled seat and folded hands that remembered a dawn before dawns. "You tried embargo," she said to the 12, voice like stone warmed in sunlight. "You tried scolding. You tried force. You will now try listening." Chen presented the framework in full, its clauses robust in the way bridges are robust, built to carry weight and allow traffic. Debates broke like waves and reformed. How do you measure contribution, which projects count as common goods? What is the exit procedure if exit becomes fashionable? The conversations were difficult and adult. A mind speaker asked the question that bureaucracies fear and democracies require. What if a species chooses not to contribute to anything but itself? Then it must live with that choice, Chen said. And with the reputational economy that follows, we will not starve them, we will not shame them, we will outshine them. During a break, children from the station school toured the gallery and drew ships on the transparency. Human wedges, Corvin spears, Altarian crescents, coloring them all the same blue. A camera caught the moment and sent it to 1 billion feeds. Suddenly, approval ratings mattered more than seating charts. On day 3, Chen placed a drive on the table. "Quantum tunnel schematics," she said, "AI guardrails, inhibitor math, full stack. We ask a price that you publish yours, not to erase difference, to prevent hoarding." "Why trust you?" asked a veteran of 1,000 calm decades, voice cracked. "Why now?" "Because we won the only way worth winning," Chen said, "by making it safe to lose." The session adjourned to draft language. Outside the viewport, axial rings spun on the axis of a promise. That governance is not the art of keeping citizens quiet, but the science of keeping them free. Compromise is an engine that runs hottest just before it seizes. On the morning the framework was to be ratified, 5 clauses lived in brackets like mice under a cupboard: representation metrics, exit safeguards, sanctions that weren't, and the definition of neighbor. The chamber felt brittle. News feeds leaned in. Somewhere a bookmaker smiled. Then the emergency lit the sky. A red dwarf in the neighboring sector hiccuped wrong. A tethered habitat, 500,000 people, trispecies, spiraled toward a gravitational knife edge that had eaten better engineers than the ones on duty. The Conft emergency network took 3 minutes to spool up. The human fleet took 1. Vasquez did not ask to leave. She asked who wanted to ride. Pilots from Altarian and Corvin strapped into human cockpits. A Zephyrian tech who had argued against open standards an hour earlier began uploading shield harmonics as if apology were a frequency. Monroe hijacked feeds with permission and projected checklists that read like prayers said quickly. The rescue unfolded on a public channel because virtue must be seen to scale. Human tugboats went first, engines tuned to new math. Confederation heavies played anchor, mass where mass matters. The inhibitor web, so recently a weapon, became a sling that bent trajectories toward safety. Robots that had been born for war learned how to throw ropes. On the floor of Axial Rings Hall, Elder Arakai stood to watch with everyone else and quietly cry. The camera did not zoom. Mercy prefers a wide shot. A terrarium bay ruptured on the habitat's skin, spilling a forest into vacuum. A Corvin ship rotated into the debris like a mother shouldering a crowd, ventral shield taking stones that had been trees that had been childhoods. A human drone printed trusses in the thinness and learned a new verb, graft. A mind speaker reached a crew that had locked in fear and taught them a breathing pattern that let their hands remember training. When the habitat settled into the rescue lattice, 1,000,000 strangers exhaled together. In the gallery, the children drew a new picture. The ships were still different shapes. The blue was deeper. In the stunned hush that follows catastrophe avoided, the chamber returned to business like a person to a life that might be worth living. The brackets around the 5 clauses seemed suddenly, embarrassingly like excuses. Representation by contribution, Corvash said into the mic, as if signing his own amnesty. The rescue counts, so will the next one. Exit safeguard, said an Altarian jurist with escrowed commons to avoid ransom. Agree. Sanctions, murmured a merchant whose ledgers had always leaned right, shall be mutual visibility. Let secrecy be expensive and honesty cheap. Neighbor, provided a mind speaker, means anyone whose emergency becomes yours in less than a day. Chen did not press. She let the room find itself the way a teacher steps back when the problem starts solving the student. When it came time to vote, she turned to Elder Arakai. Elder, Chen said softly, you first. Arakai did not speak. She stood, and that was the vote. The chamber stood with her, some slowly, some after the courage of others. The motion passed not like thunder but like dawn, inevitable in hindsight and surprising in the bones. Outside, the rescued habitat rotated under new lights. A banner unfurled in languages that had not shared banners before. Consent authorizes order. A hardliner rose to protest, the way history insists it must provide a last line for old pride. He believed he was quoting duty. He quoted fear. The hall let him finish. Then it returned to work, where warnings become traditions, the crystal hall of Nexus Prime. The dais that had once displayed the 12 now held empty space into which chairs could be added. Architecture learns. Before we sign, Chen said, we acknowledge our debt to the ones who warned, the ones who erred, and the ones who paid. The future does not cancel the past. It makes an appointment with it. Elder Arakai approached with the gait of someone who has walked to a horizon and returned carrying a smaller universe that weighs more. When we left the core, she said, we called it wisdom. Perhaps it was only fear exercised with dignity. Today I call this, she gestured at the table, the cameras, the children leaning in the gallery, wisdom exercised with courage. The charter's words were not poetry because constitutions should be furniture, sturdy, repaired in public, scratched by use. Clauses spelled out audits, exits, standards that sunset unless renewed by people who are awake. Representation snapped to projects that touch lives. Disaster brigades, research that shares, guardrails for code that thinks. One article required schools to teach the history of why junior status was wrong and the psychology that had made it feel safe. Another created a fund to pay for the slowness democracy requires. When the last signature dried, a cheer went up that sounded like a planet deciding. It was not unanimous, it was legitimate. A question hung in the air like the last chord of a song that refuses applause. Will the humans rule? Chen answered with logistics. Power accumulates. That is what gravity does. The only remedy is new masses in new orbits. We will publish everything. We will chair nothing forever. We will be strongest at the projects we actually do. If we stop doing them, we stop leading them. Later, on the observation deck of the Indomitable, the mission patch for the first joint expedition glowed under soft lights, wedges and spears and crescents circling a blank. The blank was a new galaxy, the unknown drawn as an invitation. Vasquez checked docking clamps because symbols are nothing without bolts that hold. Dr. Monroe, who had argued more than anyone and apologized fastest, handed Corvash a tablet. Syllabus, he said. For the civic academies you're building, I stole it from all of us. Stole, Corvash smiled. Borrowed your bricks, Monroe said. In classrooms from ocean cities to hollowed moons, teachers wrote a prompt on boards and walls and windows. Does order create justice, or does justice authorize order? Students argued the way the free argue, constructively, loudly, with snacks. They learned case law and star charts. They learned that consent is what transforms power from a weapon you fear into a tool you hold together. Elder Arakai stood in a quiet garden where the gravity felt kinder. Chen joined her with the tired posture of people who win the right to do more work. I wanted to ask, Chen said, what grade the warning earned. Arakai smiled, a line of light across old stone. Incomplete, she said. Until today, the Indomitable took her place in a fleet that did not match and did not need to. Engines hummed languages. The inhibitor fields that had once pinned invaders now protected routes for exploration. The rescue lattice remained deployed across a dozen sectors as a promise disguised as infrastructure. Final checks, Vasquez reported. Open the channel, Chen said, and the new alliance heard her without being told to listen. Nothing can stand against us, she said, and paused long enough for the old pride to notice itself and stand down, because we stand for each other. Jump lights stitched silence into distance. The fleet fell forward into a dark that did not feel like danger anymore. Behind them, Nexus Prime's crystal hall displayed a new inscription cut deep enough for doubt to trip on. True strength is the ability to make others strong. Beneath it, a smaller line, consent authorizes order. The old story about a wise empire ended where all empires end, with an archive. The new story began where all republics begin, with work. The difference was not the species in charge, it was the premise. Far in the black, stars warned one another about storms that decide what coasts are. On 1,000 worlds, children built coasts that could welcome storms. And a civilizational voice, no single species, not anymore, whispered a sentence worth the distance it traveled. Nothing can stand against us because we will not stand alone.